Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Might I get your full name for the record, please?
Yes, John Nicholas Madsen, Madsen.
Very nice. And I will be interviewing Mr. Madsen on his time in California during the LA riots to get his opinion and thoughts on the matter. So, what years were you in California and what were the reasons?
I was in California from 1944-ish, after my birth at San Antonio, Texas, on a military base. My parents were teachers, and I moved to Ventura County, California, between LA and Santa Barbara, small town called Fillmore, and that's where I was raised from age 2 or 3 until I went to college at age 18.
Okay. So you were 18 at the time?
At the time when I first started college, yes. But going back to your prior question, I did sports reporting and writing for my high school sports teams all throughout high school. And as a result of that, I was able to be involved with something called the Scholastic Sports Association in conjunction with the Los Angeles Examiner newspaper. And there were probably several hundred of us doing similar things for our respective high schools, reporting games to them. I also reported and wrote up games for my local town paper and the local county paper. Getting back to the Los Angeles Examiner, I did that in the 11th grade and the 12th grade and would call in all the information on Friday nights after the games and also midweek games on Tuesday or Wednesday. During that time, in between my 11th and 12th grade summer, the Examiner sponsored something at Cal Poly University, California Polytechnic University at San Luis Obispo, Colorado, a little bit north of where I was raised, about 3 hours. We were there for 2 weeks, and we had a lot of speakers come in talking to us about journalism, sports reporting, sports writing. We had lots of exercises. We got to have some fun, but it was a lot of work. So I was there with probably a couple of dozen of my peers who were selected out of the couple hundred who were reporting games, and it was a very worthwhile time. And during my senior year, as I continued doing these projects, they had a number of offerings to the various ones of us, and I was offered a 4-year scholarship to Pepperdine University in Los Angeles. At that time, this was 1965. The Watts riots had occurred in 1964 with the severe beatings of Rodney King, and Pepperdine University was located next door to the University of Southern California, USC, for those of you who know it, and also pretty close to the center of Watts. So for me, coming from a small town of 3,000 to 4,000 people, this was a mammoth undertaking to think about, and I decided I didn't want to be in the middle of downtown LA going to school. I would prefer something more small, obviously, in a different area and not in downtown where a major chaotic event had occurred. So I took a pass and said, no, thank you very much. On the other hand, just to update, if this had been a few years later, Pepperdine University is now located right on the coast above Santa Monica. Beautiful campus, and that could have swayed me because it was not in the middle of downtown LA, and it would have been a very interesting opportunity. On the other hand, I wouldn't have met a lot of people and wouldn't have met my current wife of 57 years. And so one thing that did come out of it, I applied to the University of Pacific in Stockton, California, just south of Sacramento an hour, and went to school there for 4 years and got a bachelor's in business administration / accounting. And I did get from the Los Angeles Examiner and my Scholastic Sports Association 2 semesters worth of $500 scholarships. And to you these days in 2024, that probably doesn't seem like very much. In 1961-62, that was a lot of money. So that kind of brings you up to date.
Okay. So you were not anywhere, you were avoidant of the area of the riots?
Actually, I was down there several times with my father on errands, doing some running around greater LA, and we were right there. And a couple of times, probably in my senior year of high school, we did attend a couple of USC football games, so was in the area, but learned that you went from the game to your car, and we drove back home to Ventura County. We did not spend a lot of excess time there, but yes, I was, not during the actual riots, but within a few months of them.
Okay. What were your thoughts at the time?
At the time, it was probably being a senior in high school. It probably flew over me a little bit like Vietnam flew over a lot of my college peers at the time. Although when I was in college, after I got out of college in grad school at Berkeley, I was in the Air Force for 3 years and became very familiar with Vietnam. So as far as the riots, when I was at Berkeley, there had been plenty of riots in Berkeley as well.
Yeah.
And for a lot of student activism, Mario Savio is the most famous name that came out of that. When I was there in grad school in 65 to 67, it was kind of a tame time. It was a little prior to when I got there, and obviously after I left in the summer of 67 and joined the Air Force, it became very active, and the whole 3 years of my time in the Air Force and Hospital Administration in Massachusetts at Westover Air Force Base, I was very familiar with working in the hospital with the flight surgeons, the flight dentists, and the flight nurses, because our bomb wing, the 99th Bomb Wing, which flew B-52 bombers at the time, and those planes are still in vogue right now in 2024, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I had acquaintances, peers, and friends who would go to Vietnam every 6 months from the base and the hospital that I worked in, and they all came back fortunately alive, and so that was good. But I became much more aware of Vietnam at that time.
Okay. Do you know anyone else who was involved in the riots?
I physically do not, because we had some family relatives around the greater Los Angeles area, but as one would guess, Los Angeles is a very big spread out area, even in 1964-65, and so I do not know anybody physically, but I did read a lot about it. I read the newspaper from a little kid's age, and always was involved with the front page news and the sports section. The sports section was always number one, but I read about it, was very aware of it. It was going on also when I was in college, the ramifications and things, and so it was pretty hard to not be aware of it and be pretty biased, being white myself, and seeing and reading about a black being beaten almost to death by, I would say, predominantly white police is a very bone-jarring happening.
Okay. Can you go into a little bit more depth on that, on your thoughts on civil movements?
Well, one thing that's happened in the 3 weeks that we've been back in Salisbury, Fruitland area right now is I was reminded by the first time we came back here probably 20 years ago, not realizing that Salisbury is in the south. We just didn't make that connection of where the Mason-Dixon line is, but we've become very well aware of it. And we've had some very interesting happenings while we've been back here. And a lot of them have had to do with the black population, which is great.
Yeah.
The church that we go to with our daughter has a black priest married to her husband who is white. We have a very good couple in their 90s, 10 years, 15 years our senior, who we are very friendly with and met the very first time we were here. Just this last week, we were taken by a lady who lives back here and is very historically oriented, a retired lawyer. Took us down to Princess Anne, about 10 miles south of here, and we drove all around the UMES campus, University of Maryland Eastern Shore campus. My wife and I had been there before, but we just kind of drove around the outskirts and didn't really get into the college. We were by all the living units, but this time we went all around all the major buildings and the classrooms and things. And she had a very interesting story that 20 years ago when she came to this area as a young attorney, not as a young attorney, as a middle-aged attorney. She didn't go into law until her middle part of life. And she shared that she stayed at a bed, like a, not a bed and breakfast, but a dormitory type of thing that would, kind of a quasi-motel hotel that would put up people for short-term stays. And she would take her meals there because they had a hospitality center where they were teaching hospitality to the students as a major. And she said, and she was white, and she said that she loved being on the campus, she loved the living accommodations, but when it was time for large gatherings for the students in their catering and food production and serving and everything, it was all black students serving all white audience or people. And that bothered her so much, she could not do that anymore. She found a B&B in town of Princess Anne for a few weeks until she could secure her permanent housing north in Salisbury where she was going to be working. And that just kind of was another jaw or breaking kind of eye-opening type of thing. Then she also took us to, after a nice lunch at the local Washington Inn Hotel, we went to St. Andrew's Episcopal Church a couple blocks away, which has been there for almost a couple hundred years. And we met with the deacon who is the priest in charge at this point in time. And she was sharing about the history, and it had the most beautiful stained glass windows. And these weren't small windows, these were very large windows. But she pointed up to the balcony, and she said, "This is where the black slaves got to sit when they came to this church." And we wanted to go up and see it, but we couldn't because they have not been able to restore that area at the present time. And therefore, it would be too dangerous to go up. And so she knew we wanted to go up. But she shared a counter to that, that a couple of blocks away is a Presbyterian church, and she knows the pastor at the Presbyterian church. And in their attempt to, quote, use my words, rewrite history, they took the benches where the slaves sat in their Presbyterian church in the balcony and got rid of it like it never even existed.
Wow.
Which is a whitewash or a rewrite of history. And it just, it gets your attention. I come where we live now, near Boulder, Colorado, where the University of Colorado's flagship campus is. We've moved after 30 plus years there to a little town about 5 miles down the road, much more conducive to our lifestyle. But I keep going back to the same thing. In our area, in Boulder County, basically, the black population is less than 1%. Repeat, less than 1%. And a lot of that is made up of the students at the University of Colorado, especially the athletes. And when you think about it, less than 1% is not very much. And so back here we have been immersed in just being around black people, which is, it's not a new experience, but it is an experience that I have enjoyed. And I shared with someone the other day that when I was a freshman in college, there were 2 black athletes that I became pals with, and they were big. They were basketball players, 6'7" and 6'9". And we played ping pong all the time, and we were in some business classes together, and we became good friends. And that was probably my first exposure on a daily basis to black people as an 18-year-old college freshman. And yet there again on that campus in Stockton, California, 1 hour south of Sacramento, the state capital, the main black population on the campus, which wasn't very much, was again athletes. And it was a very small percentage, much smaller than the University of Colorado is, because this was a very small campus. It was 2,000 kids. And it got your attention, and I still, when I reflect back to that, that is almost 60 years ago in my life when this happened, and so I just wish, we're too old to move again. We've moved quite a bit. We lived abroad twice, but it would be nice to have a more integrated population where we live, but it's probably not going to happen in my lifetime.
Oh. Okay. Can you describe the ways in which your ideas on civil rights have changed from your years as a freshman to your experiences now?
I am just much more aware. I'm really into newspaper reading. I like to have, here's my phone, I could just look at news on here all the time, but it's not in depth, and it's kind of just eye-catching headlines and minimal write-up, not in depth or anything. And I like to read a newspaper or magazine cover to cover every day, and I'm much more aware of what's going on in the world about me, and there are just headlines all the time that you've got to follow up on, continuous stories throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, continuous follow-up and what happened here and what happened there, and call it civil rights, call it activism, call it whatever you want to, but I think we're about to enter a very interesting and probably dangerous time in the upcoming change of the presidents of the United States in the first of the year, and I'm not exactly looking forward to it. I'm not looking away from it, but I don't like the direction that the United States is headed in right now, and I don't think we'll have, I don't know if we'll have a civil war or unrest or how much. It won't be World War III, but who knows what's going to happen. I don't like the direction we're headed in.
Yes, I think a lot of people agree with you. This is my final question.
Okay.
Would you have done anything differently?
Probably what I would have done differently would have required a slightly different tact in my high school education, starting in the 9th grade, possibly even in junior high in the 7th and 8th grade. But again, my town was not integrated with blacks, but it was integrated with Hispanics.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was going through high school, and I had a lot of good Hispanic friends, and you didn't even think about it. So if they would have been black, wouldn't have even thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
But they were Hispanic. And when I was going to school, the population was almost 90% white, 10% Hispanic. Guess what? 60 plus years later, and it was even earlier than that, but the town is now about 85 to 90% Hispanic and 10 to 15% white. And guess what? The police, the fire, the city council, the mayor, they're all Hispanic, and it works just fine. And so it is totally flipped, and it's like, it's okay.
Yes.
And so my town now is 13,000 versus the 3,000 or 4,000 when I was raised in it. So it's not a huge town, it's not a metropolitan area or metro area or something like that. But that just shows you what can happen and how successful it can be if people put their minds to it and want it to be. Where we are in the current situation now, I think it will take a lot of more maybe small immigration efforts in smaller cities that can work up to larger cities, but where you have the large metropolitan areas and multi-ethnicities, like New York City, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I would have no desire to live in New York City. It's just way too big for me. But I talk to people who are from there, have lived there, have traveled there, have worked there, and most of them think it's great. They love it, and they get used to it. And I think for them, they kind of carve out their small area, and that works for them. And so you have all these smaller areas and smaller neighborhoods, if you will. But the city as a whole, it's like any other big city. It has crime, but the crime rate has been coming down, and so that's very positive. So I like to have some hope, but probably not going to happen in my lifetime. One of my sayings of late is I'm on the back nine. I just don't know if it's on the 17th or 18th hole, but to be determined. Stay tuned.
All right. Well, that is all. And thank you very much
Thank
for
you
speaking with me.
Thank you, and good luck to you.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Yes, it was. Excuse the noise. I am in their lovely home and they are making food. So.
My
But-
daughter and my wife.
Yes. But that is a wrap.
Thank you.
No problem.